Hello everyone and welcome to week 7 of the review of Zonzo Khensa Rinpoche's teachings on Samantabhadra's King of Aspiration Prayers, the Pranidhana Raja. This week we're going to go through verses 36 to 46 and thereby complete the 16 aspirations that form the heart of this prayer. And this week's title is Vastness. And maybe we can begin by asking, what does it mean to think and aspire vastly beyond the limits of our usual human experience? In the teachings of Mahayana Buddhism, vastness refers not just to great size or scope, but to an expansive state of mind that transcends ordinary limitations and embraces infinite possibilities. This vastness is about more than just big numbers or large concepts. It's about expanding our hearts and minds to encompass the boundless nature of reality itself. As we'll see this week, the bodhisattvas dwelling on the higher bhumis, or stages of awakening, embody this vastness through their incredible aspirations, which grow increasingly profound and boundless as they progress on their path. In this week's verses, we're now seeking to aspire in the manner of these bodhisattvas on the higher bhumis as they approach enlightenment. And their ocean-like qualities, activities, and aspirations may seem almost inconceivably vast as seen from the perspective of young bodhisattvas like us, who are just starting out on our journey. For instance, we might struggle to help even our closest friends and family members, whereas these bodhisattvas are aspiring to purify oceans of realms and liberate countless beings across multiple dimensions of existence. So we can refer to their view, aspiration, and activities as vast or inconceivable because they challenge our assumptions about what is possible and expand our usual ways of thinking about space, time, and capability. This week's image symbolizes the expansion of our hearts and minds to include all beings and the entire cosmos in a vast vision of compassion and altruistic activity. By contemplating and aspiring to such vastness, we begin to let go of limited views and embrace a more holistic and interconnected view of life. This expansion is not just philosophical, but deeply practical, aimed at cultivating the view and qualities necessary to aid all beings effectively. And as we explore these verses together today, I encourage you to open your mind to the vastness presented by these aspirations. Let's challenge our perceptions and embrace the limitless potential of our own Buddha nature. Perhaps we can approach today's session as a journey into the heart of vastness, where each verse becomes an invitation to expand our understanding and our capacity for compassion. So with that, let's take a moment to tune our motivation. So we already entered the realm of inconceivability last week when we talked about how the first Bhumi Bodhisattva realizes the view of non-duality. This week we'll go further and deeper by considering the view and aspiration of the Bodhisattvas on the higher Bhumis. And talking about non-duality is always going to be challenging. In the words of the great Tibetan master Jigme Lingpa, as soon as we talk, it's all contradiction. As soon as we think, it's all confusion. But words are all we have for now. So we shall press on, despite knowing that words can only take us so far. And we know that we need to cultivate merit and wisdom to progress on the path. So Rinpoche's underlying message holds true. Aspiration is something that we can do, and something that we should do. So with that, let's turn to the 12th of the 16 aspirations. And this 12th aspiration is called the Aspiration to the Power of Enlightenment through 9 Powers. It's verses 36 and 37. Through the power of swift miracles, the power of the vehicle like a doorway, the power of conduct that possesses all virtuous qualities, the power of loving kindness, all pervasive, the power of merit that is totally virtuous, the power of wisdom free from attachment, and the powers of knowledge, skillful means, and samadi, may I perfectly accomplish the power of enlightenment. So these two verses are about aspiring for 9 particular powers that are possessed by bodhisattvas on the higher bhumis, which they cultivate and apply to accomplish the 10th power of enlightenment itself. And these powers refer to abilities or qualities that cannot be affected or diminished in any way by obstructing conditions, especially the afflictive emotions. And the commentaries explain that these verses refer to bodhisattvas on the 7th bhumi and beyond. And I should note in passing there are several similar lists of 10 powers elsewhere in the Mahayana teachings. For example, the 10 powers of the Buddha, the 10 strengths of the Buddha, and the 10 powers of a bodhisattva. But this is a different list from any of those other lists. And here Rinpoche commented that although these qualities of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas might seem beyond us, we should nevertheless talk about these things for our own merit and for the future. It's good to hear about them repeatedly as we journey on the path, because just by hearing about these qualities, we'll be getting closer to them. But it is difficult to talk about them. He gave the example for us. It's difficult to talk about the vision of a person who has two eyes on the soles of their feet instead of on their face. With inferential logic, perhaps we can vaguely talk about it, but we really cannot say much. We don't know how things would look to them. And it is like that. Of course, it's much more than that, but that's just an example. So let's briefly go through these 10 powers. And the first is the power of swift miracles, or in a different translation, it's translated as the power of miracles that has complete speed. And this is like a power to manifest miracles, because the Bodhisattvas have understood both relative truth and ultimate truth, and because they've understood the non-duality of numbers, size, destinations, and so forth, they can manifest miracles such as crossing a long distance within a moment, expanding a moment to an aeon, or contracting an aeon to a moment, and so forth. For someone who has not yet understood non-duality, all these abilities will simply appear to be miraculous. So we already talked about the Nimanakaya and Sambhogakaya a little last week, and in this week's verses, we're going to be talking about the way that the Bodhisattvas on the higher bhumis aspire. So it will help us to understand the Mahayana view on how these Bodhisattvas perceive and experience the world. So here I'm going to draw a little on Rinpoche's teachings on Chandrakirti's Madhyamakavatara, his entering the middle way. So talking about the 10 bhumis, the first 7 bhumis are referred to as the impure 7 bhumis, and the last 3 bhumis are referred to as the pure bhumis, or stages of the Bodhisattva path. These last 3 bhumis are very special stages, and from an ordinary point of view, like ours, we cannot tell the difference between such bodhisattvas and the Buddha. From the 8th bhumi onwards, bodhisattvas do not receive teachings from the Nimanakaya anymore, only the Sambhogakaya. And last week we talked about how enlightenment is seen as the result of elimination, like cleaning the dirt from a dirty window. And so in the Mahayana, our progress on the path can be assessed in terms of our progress in removing these defilements and obscurations. In other words, in cleaning the dirt on our window. But what is this dirt? We already talked about defilements and obscurations during week 3 of our review, and now we'll talk a little more about how defilements are explained and understood in the Madhyamaka. And you might think that talking about the defilements of the Bodhisattvas might seem a little removed from our current concerns, but it is not as if their defilements are different from our own. Yes, you could think about this symbolically, but I'd encourage you to approach this with the understanding that this is the work that each of us has to do in order to clean our own windows. And this is also going to bring additional perspective to Rinpoche's example of the nightmare of falling from a 26-story building that we talked about last week. So in the Madhyamaka, we distinguish between 2 main kinds of defilements. The first is clinging to phenomena as truly existent, what's called denzin in Tibetan. And this is our ordinary samsaric way of perceiving objects as real. So here Rinpoche gave the example of dreaming about a cup of coffee. If in your dream someone asks you if you're dreaming coffee, then if you don't know that you're dreaming, you'll say, yes, I'm drinking coffee. If they ask you if you're sure, you'll say, yes, definitely, I'm sure. And if they ask whether your coffee is satisfying you, you'll say, yes, it is. Then when you wake up and someone asks you whether the coffee you drank really existed, you'll say, no, it was just a dream. It was not a truly existent cup of coffee. So in this example, the clinging to the dream coffee as real, or truly existent, is denzin, whereas an awakened person no longer thinks of or experiences the dream coffee as real. Okay, the second major kind of defilement is called clinging to or fixation on characteristics, or tsenzin in Tibetan. As long as we experience an object and a subject, there is this fixation on characteristics. There's an object there, and we can describe it and say something about it, what it is like. We can talk about its characteristics. Now, this is a more subtle obscuration than the first defilement of clinging to phenomena as truly existent, because even the person who has woken from their dream can still say something about the characteristics of the dream coffee. Perhaps they can remember the color and flavor of the coffee in the dream, or the type of cup it was served in, and maybe even the other people in the coffee shop, or the pictures on the walls and so forth. Now, for simplicity, we can say that the first defilement, the belief in things being truly existent, or denzin, is the cause of samsara. And when they attain the first bhumi, the bodhisattvas overcome this defilement and abandon this belief. But they still have the second defilement of fixation on characteristics, the tsenzin. If they look at a table or chair, they will see its illusory nature. They will know it is not truly existent. But when they talk about it, they will still think that blue is blue, yellow is yellow, and so on. They still perceive or grasp these kinds of dualistic characteristics, which we might call conventional truth, and which they see as mere relative truth. So Rinpoche gave a classic example to illustrate this. For bodhisattvas on the bhumis, it's like a magician performing a trick. For example, creating an illusion of a monkey riding an elephant. Now, ignorant beings do not know this is a magic trick, so they might think, what a strange sight, a monkey riding an elephant. And this is that first defilement of clinging to phenomena as truly existing, or denzin, because these ignorant beings think the monkey and the elephant are really there, and because of this ignorance they roam in samsara. As Rinpoche said, they laugh and they cry when they see the magic show. They part from their money to see the show. They become hooked to it, addicted to it, and they suffer. Now, the magician himself also sees the monkey riding the elephant. Of course, he has to be able to see them, otherwise he could not perform his trick correctly, and he might mistakenly put the elephant on top of the monkey. But the difference is that he knows it is just magic, so he does not have the defilement of clinging to true existence. The magic does not hook him, and he does not pay to see the show. That is the difference between the first and second kinds of defilements, the denzin and the tsenzin. The point here is that for sublime beings, the elephant and the monkey are mere relative truth. But for an ordinary person looking at the elephant and the monkey, they are the real relative truth. Indeed, most ordinary beings don't know about the two truths, and so they wouldn't distinguish ultimate and relative truth at all. For them, the elephant and the monkey are simply reality. Like the vast mass of humanity in the dystopian movie The Matrix, most ordinary beings simply don't question their experience of the world. Indeed, many of us are quite attached to our subjective experiences and beliefs, and we can get quite passionate in saying they cannot or should not be questioned at all. And unfortunately, the state of current social and political discourse isn't really helping us here. However, it's very difficult to make progress on the bodhisattva path if we cannot accept that maybe some of our experiences might be mistaken or confused. Now, there is a third defilement called mere apprehension. So when we come to the bodhisattvas on the higher bhumis, those whose view and aspiration we're talking about in this week's verses, in other words, the bodhisattvas on the 8th to the 10th bhumis, they no longer perceive ordinary perceptions or appearances at all. So this is why only bodhisattvas on the 8th bhumi can directly perceive and receive teachings from the Sambhogakaya. When they reach the 8th bhumi, they engage in actions to benefit sentient beings without any effort. But they still have a very subtle defilement called mere apprehension, or ni nung in Tibetan, which is a very subtle form of dualism. And finally, when the bodhisattvas reach the 10th bhumi, the final stage before enlightenment, they no longer even have the intention of helping. There is no intention, there is no conception, and so there is absolutely no effort. These bodhisattvas benefit beings by the accumulated power of all the aspirations that they made in the past. And finally, a Buddha, someone completely enlightened, does not have any of these defilements. They do not have clinging to phenomena as truly existent, the denzin. They do not have fixation on characteristics, the tsenzin, or even the mere apprehension, the ninang. Buddhas do not have perception. For the Buddha, all continuity of the mind has stopped. Now, this gives rise to many new questions. For example, how can the Buddhas benefit sentient beings if they have no perception and no intention to benefit? This is a vast topic, but when Rinpoche taught the Uttara Tantra Shastra, he gave an example. The Buddha, who is like the sun, radiates Dharma like sunshine, and those who are fortunate, those who are to be tamed by the Buddha, will open like a lotus, and they will reap the benefit like the harvest. But other beings will be provoked and irritated like the night-blooming jasmine. Now this is a plant that avoids the sun and only blooms at night. The three kayas are like the sun and its rays. The sun radiates at all times and in all places. Likewise, the Buddha does not have any motivation, intention, or prejudice. If we are able to hear the Buddha's teachings or experience the Buddha's blessings, it's not because they are choosing to teach us or bless us rather than other beings, but rather because we have the merit to receive or experience these teachings and blessings. And so again, we return to the profound importance of cultivating merit, so that we might be able to hear and understand the teachings of the Buddhas and receive their blessings. Just like the clean window that is already there beneath the dirt, the teachings and the blessings of the Buddha are already there waiting for us, if we can just cultivate the merit to receive them. So once again, we come back to the power and importance of aspiration. Okay, the second of the 10 powers is called the power of the vehicle like a doorway, or translated as the power of yanas that possess every gateway. So this power is the power of being able to enter into not just the 3 yanas that we generally accept, but all the infinite teachings that the Buddha taught according to the propensity of different beings. And Rinpoche said that, for example, at the moment, as reason-oriented people or followers of logic, we can perhaps accept logic and reason to explain things. But when we hear concepts like Buddha fields and pure realms like Sukhavati, things that fall outside the domain of science and cannot be explained with logic and reason, then we may not really accept them. We might think of these things as just provisional or expedient teachings. Likewise, some people can accept teachings like dependent arising, emptiness, and so forth, but when the teachings talk about karma and rebirth, their minds cannot assimilate this. They think these ideas are outdated or religious or irrational. Now, Rinpoche didn't say it directly here, but here he's teaching is a direct challenge to secular Buddhism, which rejects all the supposedly religious aspects of Buddhism. Now, this is a big topic, and I think it's very important to acknowledge that there is no conflict between Buddhism and science or rationality in any way. And although the secularists might wish to frame it this way, there is no war of science against religion here. However, Rinpoche is making an important point here. As Jigme Lingpa said, when it comes to non-duality, as soon as we talk, it's all contradiction. As soon as we think, it's all confusion. And we don't even have to leave the realm of science to be able to admit that our ordinary worldly ways of thinking are incomplete, and that our understanding can at best only ever be a map rather than the territory. And of course, science itself is a work in progress. What was understood to be true during the time of Galileo in the 16th and 17th centuries, or Newton in the 17th and 18th centuries, and these were perhaps the greatest scientists of their day, that is not all still considered true or complete today. And when it comes to the Buddhist path and our aim of transcending ego and dualistic clinging, even the most basic koans, like what is the sound of one hand clapping, fail the test of conforming to ordinary rationality. And yet they're not religious. They're not asking you to believe anything, but rather they are tools to help you challenge, untangle, and disassemble your beliefs. And the same is true with the vastness of the vision described in the Pranidhana Raja, which takes more of a maximalist rather than a minimalist approach to challenging our ordinary rationality, but it challenges it nevertheless. So in this spirit of challenging and breaking through our ordinary rationality, I'd like to talk a little about the idea of having our minds blown. Now, sometimes we might say that something blew our mind. We use this expression to describe a highly impressive or shocking or overwhelming experience that challenges or surpasses our expectations or understanding. We're often referring to something that's so extraordinary, surprising, or enlightening that it causes us to rethink our assumptions or see something in a completely new light. We might say this in casual conversation to convey excitement or amazement at a discovery, experience, or piece of information. But the term actually works quite well in thinking about the Buddhist path as well. Because in Buddhism, the spiritual path can be thought of as a journey that blows the mind in a profound and transformative sense. This metaphor captures the essence of the deep, radical shifts in perception and understanding that we seek through Buddhist practice. In Buddhism, having one's mind blown can be seen as a transformative experience that leads to a deeper understanding of the true nature of reality, ultimately aiding in the pursuit of enlightenment. This notion is grounded in the idea of breaking free from the habitual patterns of thought, perception, and emotional responses that bind us to suffering. For example, Buddhism would say that much of human suffering is rooted in delusion, such as the beliefs in a permanent self, in unchanging entities, in the ultimate reality of sensory experiences. Experiencing a mind-blowing moment in Buddhism involves a radical realization that cuts through these delusions, providing a glimpse of the true nature of phenomena as impermanent, non-self, and empty of inherent existence. Such insights can be sudden and profound, disrupting our deeply held beliefs and altering our relationship to the world. And the Buddhist tradition offers a rich variety of approaches to achieving profound insights or mind-blowing experiences, ranging from minimalist and direct methods seen in Zen to the expansive visionary practices found in texts like the Avatamsaka Sutra and this Pranidhana Raja that we're going through right now. And these methods cater to different temperaments and spiritual inclinations, emphasizing either simplicity and directness or vastness and complexity and richness. Now, the minimalist approaches are particularly prominent in traditions such as Zen or Chan Buddhism, but also in Mahamudra and Dzogchen. And they strip away complexity to focus on the essence of mind and reality. For example, in Zen training, the goal is to induce sudden insights through direct, often stark practices that cut through conceptual thinking. Zen koans are designed to exhaust the rational mind, forcing practitioners to abandon usual ways of thinking. The aim is to provoke a direct realization of the true nature of self and reality, culminating in satori, or sudden enlightenment. There are also techniques such as direct pointing out the nature of mind, which involve minimal discourse and conceptualization. Teachers may use abrupt commands, physical gestures, or even silence to jolt students out of conceptual thinking and enter a direct, immediate awareness of their own true nature. And there's also an overall flavor of simplicity and naturalness and everydayness. Zen emphasizes seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary, encouraging practitioners to experience enlightenment in simple daily activities and in nature. This approach seeks to demystify the spiritual path, presenting it as accessible and immediate, integrated into every breath and action. And by contrast, we can see the Avatamsaka Sutra and Samantabhadra's King of Aspiration prayers as examples of a maximalist approach. These teachings are characterized by their grand cosmic vision of reality and the bodhisattva journey. They often have highly elaborate, even inconceivable imagery and concepts to expand our minds beyond their ordinary limits. In texts like the Avatamsaka Sutra, the universe is portrayed in its infinite, interdependent complexity. There is a cosmos of infinite realms upon realms, each containing Buddha's teaching Dharma in ways that are adapted to the capacities of all beings. And this portrayal helps to shatter our limited perceptions of reality and encourages an expansive, interconnected view of all phenomena. And likewise, these sutras are maximalist in terms of their vast practices and aspirations. For example, here we vow to make endless offerings to all Buddhas, to always be present whenever a Buddha appears, to lead all beings to enlightenment. These practices and vows are designed to cultivate an immeasurably vast heart and mind, embodying the bodhisattva ideal of universal benevolence and limitless compassion. We're also encouraged to make vast visualizations of Buddhas, pure lands, and vast assemblies of beings. This mental training not only enhances our concentration and devotion, but also expands our sense of the possible, pushing the boundaries of our imagination and perception. And both of these approaches, the maximalist and the minimalist, are aimed at transcending our limited dualistic views of self and the world, albeit through very different means. While the maximalist methods use vastness and complexity to expand our minds, the minimalist methods strip away all extras to reveal the stark, luminous nature of reality beneath. Each approach can be mind-blowing in its own way, offering different paths to the same ultimate truth, tailored to the varying needs and capacities of practitioners. And ultimately, whether we get there through the vast or inspiring visions of the Avatamsaka Sutra, or the direct, intimate confrontation with reality in Zen, Both of these approaches lead us to a deeper understanding and transformation, challenging our conventional views and encouraging a profound re-evaluation of what is truly real and important. And although it's not our topic today, I'd like to take a moment to appreciate the Vajrayana path and how it incorporates both maximalist and minimalist elements, thus making it a particularly comprehensive and nuanced path within the Buddhist tradition. Vajrayana practices are designed to harness the full spectrum of human experience, emotion, perception, and intellect toward the goal of enlightenment. Vajrayana is well known for its maximalism, which includes complex visualization practices involving detailed mandalas, intricate deity forms, and elaborate ritual sequences. In those kinds of practices, we visualize ourselves as deities embodying divine attributes and qualities, which serves to expand our sense of identity and reality, breaking down our ordinary perceptions of self and world. But Vajrayana also has an essential element of minimalism. In deity visualization practices, after constructing the detailed visualization of the deity in the mandala, there is a phase of dissolution, where all the visualized forms are dissolved back into emptiness, perhaps the most profound expression of minimalism. Emptiness meditation involves direct contemplation on the lack of inherent existence of all phenomena, leading to a profound release from attachment and dualistic perception. And at the pinnacle of the Vajrayana path, we have Dzogchen and Mahamudra, which emphasize the direct realization of mind's true nature. These practices involve stripping away all concepts and experiences to rest in the simple, uncontrived state of awareness, often referred to as the natural state or ordinary mind. So Vajrayana is thus highly integrative, combining the imaginative and expansive qualities of maximalist practices with the direct, essence-striking minimalist approaches. And this combination allows practitioners to engage fully with both the form, through elaborate practices and visualizations, and also the formless, through meditations on emptiness and the nature of mind, thus accelerating the path to enlightenment by using all facets of human experience. And this dual approach of Vajrayana is particularly suited to practitioners who seek a path that is both deeply engaging and directly liberating, providing tools to transform ordinary experiences into gateways to transcendence, while also offering a straightforward, profound teaching on the ultimate nature of reality. And this makes the Vajrayana a unique and powerful vehicle for spiritual growth and realization. So for those of you who are Vajrayana practitioners, I hope you can see how this Pranidhana Raja elegantly combines both maximalism and minimalism, offering us a vast and inconceivable cosmic vision, while always coming back to the foundation of emptiness, non-duality, and the direct realization of the nature of mind. And hopefully through hearing, contemplating, and practicing these verses, we will also experience our minds being blown. Okay, so back to the 10 powers. The third power is the power of conduct that possesses all virtuous qualities, or the power of conduct that has the complete qualities. And this is widely explained in the sutras, and Rinpoche said it refers to how to cultivate the attitude of the bodhisattva while going upstairs, going downstairs, eating meals, and doing each and every kind of activity. And this power transforms even the smallest activity or movement into conduct that has all the good and beneficial qualities. And one of the commentaries here says, it is said in the Sutra of Perfectly Pure Object of Conduct that when a bodhisattva is inside a house, he remains endowed with natural awareness of all sentient beings without being overpowered by the darkness of the house. One should generate this kind of bodhicitta. And likewise, the unlimited activities of our body, speech, and mind are all transformed into conduct for the sake of benefiting sentient beings. And so last week we talked about pure perception. We might perhaps talk about this power as pure action. Okay, the fourth is the power of loving kindness, all pervasive, also translated as the power of love that is universal. And this loving kindness should pervade everybody, all beings, everything, not just beings who are suffering and emaciated, but those who are rich, powerful, and so on. The commentaries give the example of this power of this loving kindness pervading all worldly realms of the 10 directions in a similar way to how a bodhisattva might manifest a cloud and cause a stream of rain to fall through the strength of their love for the inhabitants of the hot hells, and in that way ensuring their well-being. Okay, so that was verse 36. Now on to verse 37, the fifth power. The power of merit that is totally virtuous, or the power of merit that has complete goodness. And this merit allows us to outshine the power of the worldly deities or worldly celestial beings, gods such as Brahma, Indra, and so on. Their merit cannot compete with the merit to establish even a single pore in the skin of these bodhisattvas. And the reason why the bodhisattva's merit is able to outshine the power of these worldly gods is because the merit of the bodhisattvas is accompanied by the view of non-duality. Okay, sixth, the power of wisdom free from attachment, also translated as the power of knowledge that is without impediment. So here it's about cultivating the power of not getting obstructed or having hindrances. So while trying to cultivate all the arts and methods to benefit other beings, we don't have obstructions or hindrances in accomplishing our activity. The seventh is the power of knowledge, or the power of wisdom. And this is prajna, or transcendental wisdom, referring to the cultivating the power of being able to enter into the view, the profound view which is beyond extremes and uncompounded. The eighth is the power of skillful means or methods. And when skillful means are combined with this profound non-dual wisdom, we can transform not only virtue but also non-virtue into the path that leads to benefiting other beings and finally to their enlightenment. The ninth is the power of samadi, the power of being able to enter into different kinds of meditative absorption. Now, every single moment has a unique quality or characteristic when it comes to the sublime bodhisattvas. And for example, the famous Heart Sutra, the Prajnaparamita Hridaya, starts by describing how the Buddha entered a particular meditative exhaustion. It says, "At that time, the Blessed One entered the samadhi that expresses the Dharma called profound illumination." And the sutra continues, "And at the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, while practicing the profound Prajnaparamita, saw in this way. He saw the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, 'How should a son or daughter of noble family train who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita?' And then Avalokiteshvara's answer gives us the rest of the famous Heart Sutra, including the famous line, 'Form is emptiness, emptiness also is form, emptiness is no other than form, form is no other than emptiness.' In other words, the Buddha entering this particular samadhi was the catalyst or stimulus for Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra to enter into that conversation. Also, this is what is meant by the power of samadhi. And finally, the 10th power is, may I perfectly accomplish the power of enlightenment. So this is cultivating the power of transforming all of these previous 9 strengths and powers into the cause of Buddhahood or enlightenment. It is the strength that swiftly actualizes the inconceivable qualities of the Buddha in our own mind streams. Okay, so turning now to the 13th aspiration, which is verse 38, the aspiration to the antidotes that pacify the obscurations. Here the verse is, may I purify the power of karma, destroy the power of harmful emotions, render negativity utterly powerless, and perfect the power of good actions. So here Rinpoche said there's another power which can also be called outshining obstacles, sometimes called ziji, which is the power of presence or outshining others. The Bodhisattva is not stained by duality, not just the duality of time and space, but duality of all kinds, good, bad, moral, immoral, and so on, and in every way in terms of their body, speech, mind, activity, and so on. So there's just no way the bodhisattvas will fall into pretense or hypocrisy. They're authentic. What you see is what it is. And this really shatters the heart of the demons of hypocrisy. So this is a brief way of explaining this aspiration. Rinpoche continued, the bodhisattva has authentic sitting, authentic presence, authentic being. People aren't really going to argue with you when you're authentic. And here Rinpoche said perhaps a very bad example might be a 3-year-old baby walking around naked. Are you going to argue with them? Are you going to say it's unlawful and all of that? We just have to accept it. There's not much argument. And everyone accepts it. So now multiply this billions of times. And the bodhisattva reaches this sort of total authenticity. What you see is what you get, just how it is, which gives them the power to outshine obstacles and obscurations. And through the Pranidhana Raja, one can attain this power to be able to instantaneously destroy the defilements, including those that arise from the 8 kinds of extremes. Now, at this point, Rinpoche talked about the 4 maras, especially when he taught in Bodh Gaya in 2023. Now, this subject actually appears on the 3rd line of verse 38, although it's not explicit in all the translations. For example, the one that I read translates the line as "render negativity utterly powerless," but the translation by 84,000 has "render powerless the power of the maras." So what are these maras? Now, there's a well-known story in the life of the Buddha about how the maras or demons attacked the Buddha before he attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. As Rinpoche said, that's how it's presented for beginners, and there are frescoes and representations with fearful expressions of these demons or maras. But when we talk about rendering the maras powerless in the context of the Pranidhana Raja, we're not only referring to the gross or outer maras that attacked the Buddha before his enlightenment, but also more subtle maras or demons. And there are 4 types of obstructive or demonic forces which create obstacles to us as practitioners on the spiritual path. And so these 4 are firstly the klesha mara, or the mara of emotions. So this is mara or demon as the embodiment of all unskillful emotions, such as greed, hate, and delusion. And it symbolizes our addiction to the habitual patterns of negative emotion. The second mara is the mrityu mara, the mara of the Lord of Death, which symbolizes both death itself, but also our fear of change and impermanence of all kinds. Rinpoche said this mara also refers to time. So we might say that right now it's 10:30 and soon it's going to be 11 o'clock. And in this way, time is also one of the most vicious maras or demons. The third is the skanda mara, the mara of the aggregates. And this mara is a metaphor for the entirety of conditioned existence. It symbolizes our clinging to forms, perceptions, and mental states as real. And according to Buddhism, once things are collected together in any kind of aggregation, it is certain they will at some point fall apart or disintegrate. So this refers especially to the 5 aggregates of our body, feelings, and so on, which are already ready to fall apart or disintegrate. Finally, the 4th is the Devaputra Mara, the Mara of the Son of God. And in its outer form, this is the Deva of the sensuous realm, who tried to prevent Gautama Buddha from attaining liberation on the night of the Buddha's enlightenment. It symbolizes our craving for pleasure, convenience, and even for emotional states like peace. This Devaputra Mara, or Mara of the Son of God, is the vastest among these 4 maras. For instance, you might meditate on loving kindness and compassion, and if you feel that you've actually got compassion and loving kindness arising in your mind stream, even that could also be the Devaputra Mara. Basically, Devaputra Mara refers to the clinging to characteristics that we talked about earlier. So, the reason the Bodhisattva can ultimately purify the power of karma and render all these maras and negativity powerless is that the intention of the Bodhisattva is vast and profound. And not only their intention, but also their view is also profound. And since the Bodhisattvas have realized the view of non-duality, they are able to gradually purify and ultimately completely abandon the power of karma from its root, including the most demonic obstacles and forms of negativity. And here Rinpoche gave the example of cooking an egg. Before we cook an egg, whether or not we want to cook the egg is in our hands. We have the power to decide. But at a glance, it might seem that after once we've cooked the egg 99% of the way, we cannot but help to fully cook it. We don't think we have the power to reverse the cooking of that egg. But through the power of vast intention and vast view, even this seemingly non-reversible karma can also be reversed or purified by the Bodhisattvas through their vast view and intention. Now here, as with Rinpoche's earlier comments on rebirth in the earlier verses, this is another example of directly confronting and challenging our ordinary rationality. Because in other places he's also used this example of cooking an egg to illustrate that Buddhism is indeed a path that is based on cause and condition, such that if an egg has been cooked, there's nothing we can do to uncook it. Whereas here he's saying something that appears to be directly opposed to that. So once again, we're confronted with paradox, back to inconceivably, vastness, and what we might term blowing our minds. Okay, 14th aspiration. the aspiration to enlightened activities, which is verses 39 to 40. I shall purify oceans of realms, liberate oceans of sentient beings, understand oceans of Dharma, realize oceans of wisdom, perfect oceans of actions, fulfill oceans of aspirations, serve oceans of Buddhas, and perform these without ever growing weary, through oceans of aeons. So this is mainly about the activities that are performed when a bodhisattva obtains the 10th bhumi, which is known as Dharma cloud, where one has completed the 10 powers, 10 strengths, and so on. But there are practices conforming with this already before the 10th bhumi, and by engaging in these practices and aspirations, even beginners can start the process of accumulating merit and beginning to place karmic imprints to cultivate these habits. So this is just a very brief glimpse of how the 10th bhumi bodhisattva thinks. And here Rinpoche gave some examples to help us imagine these ocean-like realms. He said, for example, some of the Buddha fields are no bigger than the size of our thumb, and the duration of some of these Buddha fields is only as long as it takes to snap our fingers. And there's no instance in the whole of the 10 directions or times that there are no Buddha fields. In some of the Buddha fields there are only 8th bhumi bodhisattvas. And in some Buddha fields there are no human beings, but only other kinds of beings. So we make the aspiration to be able to enter into all such ocean-like Buddha fields and liberate the ocean-like beings inside them. And when we aspire to realize ocean-like teachings in these Buddha fields, at the moment we only know and talk about teachings like the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, dependent arising, and so on. And these are just a drop in the ocean of the teachings that were taught by the Buddha. So we also make aspiration to realize ocean-like wisdom. At the moment, we can barely talk about the wisdom of the Buddha. Even when we talk about non-dual wisdom, it almost does not fit into our small heads, as Rinpoche said. And we also make aspiration to enter into the ocean of activity or conduct, sometimes king-like conduct, sometimes like a prostitute, sometimes like a monk, sometimes like a drunk person, sometimes like animals and birds, or non-human spirits, and so forth. And again, these stanzas are really talking about the grand vision of the Mahayana, the ocean-like, vast, infinite vision. And the point here is not that vastness is referring to something very big, but rather that it's something that goes completely beyond our concepts, including concepts of big and small, so that we break all concepts and categories of size and scale and dimension. And Rinpoche often gives the example of Vairochana Buddha to illustrate this. And here I'll draw from a teaching he gave in Taipei in February 2021. Now, Vairochana Buddha is one of the 5 Buddha families. It's not like there are actually 5 Buddhas sitting out there somewhere. Basically, the 5 Buddhas are the 5 elements or 5 objects of consciousness, which are forms, sounds, odors, tastes, and tactile objects. For example, form is the object of eye consciousness. Sounds are the object of ear consciousness and are usually considered Amitabha Buddha. And the correspondence changes in different teachings, but generally Vairochana Buddha is form. So anything that is form, color, shape, like this room, this screen, these colors, all that is Vairochana. And this is beautifully explained in a sutra which talks about the shape and size of Vairochana. Here Vairochana Buddha is sitting in meditation posture, and on his hands rests a begging bowl, which contains countless universes. In the bowl are 25 lotus branches, and from among these, on the 13th lotus branch, there is another branch, with a lotus flower and many other flowers all joined together. And according to traditional Buddhist cosmology, in the center of this flower is the world where humans live, which is called Zambuling in Tibetan or Jambudvipa in Sanskrit. It is supposedly the only place where one may become enlightened if born as a human being. This world has 4 continents, and in the center is Mount Meru. And there are also 100,000 other world systems there, each with their own set of 4 continents in Mount Meru. These are the indestructible worlds where thousands of Buddhas come, also called the fearless world, meaning the beings who live there have no basis for fear. And then, like many Mahayana teachings, the sutra goes on to say that this Vairochana Buddha is just so big, as we've seen, and just one of the lotuses in his begging bowl is our entire world system. But then, just like the vast and inconceivable descriptions in the Pranidhana Raja, In each pore of Vajana's body is a whole set of universes with their world systems. But the sutra explains that even then, the original Vajana hasn't become bigger to fit all these Buddha fields in each pore. And likewise, all these Buddha fields have not become smaller. They haven't become reduced to some tiny size in order to fit into one of his pores. So again, we're talking about how shape, color, size are, as Rinpoche puts it, so depriving. Ideas of size, color, shape actually make us poor. We're stuck with things like white or yellow or green or square or rectangle. Whereas Vajana is just infinite, beyond any concepts of size, shape, color, and dimension. And we should aspire to understand these verses of the Pranidhana Raja in the same way, which is to say they're describing something that we cannot hope to understand with our ordinary dualistic conceptual minds. Again, these verses are like a finger pointing us to the moon. Okay, the 15th aspiration is called the Aspiration for Training, which is verses 41 to 44. All the Buddhas throughout the whole of time attained enlightenment through good actions, and their prayers and aspirations for enlightened action. May I fulfill them completely. To emulate the Bodhisattvas, Samantabhadra, the eldest of the sons of all the Buddhas, is called Samantabhadra, all good. So that I may act with a skill like his, I dedicate fully all these merits. To purify my body, my speech, and my mind as well, to purify my actions in all realms, may I be the equal of Samantabhadra in his skill in good dedication. In order to perform the full virtue of good actions, I shall act according to Manjushri's powers of aspiration, and without ever growing weary, in all the aeons to come, I shall perfectly fulfill every one of his aims. So there was little commentary here, because most of us, we can't even begin to fathom these enlightened qualities and activities of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So what can we do? Well, if we wish to follow and emulate them, one thing we can do is say, there's a Bodhisattva called Samantabhadra, and however he aspired, may we also aspire in that same way. And by doing that, that encompasses all his aspirations, even those that we cannot really understand at the moment. So in verse 41, we're aspiring as the Buddhas did. In verses 42 to 44, we're aspiring in the way that the Bodhisattvas Samantabhadra and Manjushri aspired. And in all these ways, may we also tirelessly aspire. Okay, the 16th, the concluding aspiration, verses 45 to 46. Let my bodhisattva acts be beyond measure. Let my enlightened qualities be measureless too. Keeping to this immeasurable activity, may I accomplish all the miraculous powers of enlightenment. Sentient beings are as limitless as the boundless expanse of space. So shall my prayers of aspiration for them be as limitless as their karma and harmful emotions. So here we're saying that sentient beings are not restricted by any limit. Right? We can't say there are just so many of them in any one direction or particular time and so forth. So likewise, the realm of their karma is similarly unrestricted, also limitless. So just as the karma and affliction of these beings is limitless, in a similar way, may each of my aspiration prayers be limitless, so that the karma and afflictions of each and every one of these sentient beings that fill space may be exhausted, and they will all be placed on the bliss of unsurpassable enlightenment. Now, in this 16th and final aspiration, we're talking about the 5th and final path, which is the level of Buddhahood. And here Rinpoche said that when you read stanzas like, may our qualities be infinite, this would include things like if a bodhisattva is required to be an idiot from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock today, why not? That's included. Yeah? Idiots in their own way can be very powerful and can benefit many people. If a bodhisattva needs to be helpless or sick, they should do that. If a bodhisattva needs to be homeless or a drug addict, or even to be annoying for half an hour, may I be that. Basically, you cannot exclude anything, not a single quality. The only thing that can be excluded is something that goes against the truth. In other words, something that will not benefit others. Okay, so I'd like to just include a couple of questions and answers from Rinpoche's teachings in Vancouver in 2024 and Taipei in 2016 to illustrate some of the things we talked about this week. So first, a question on the two truths. Well, somebody asked Rinpoche, we've been talking about aspiration. Usually we say something like, may I something something aspire. It sounds like I am in pursuit of something, or I am trying to do something. And yet we also talk about the idea of selflessness. So if there's no self, who is trying to aspire? And here Rinpoche said, yes, you're talking about the story of me and the monk in Thailand, which we talked about in week 2. So remember, we're only talking about aspiration during the period from the beginning of the nightmare until the end of the nightmare. In other words, we're only talking about aspiration from the perspective of the path, when we're cleaning the dirt on the window. Other than that, there is no aspiration. So just to be clear, as long as you think you have a self, you should aspire. When there is no more self, there is no aspiration. The confusion arises when we mix the two truths, because of course, ultimately there is no self. There is no dirt on the window, because the window is already clean. It is primordially clean, as we saw last week. It doesn't even have concepts of dirt and no dirt. However, the relative truth is the world of our experience, our subjective reality. And right now, we still have hope and fear and all the usual samsaric emotions and experiences. And so although our window is ultimately clean, relatively, there is still dirt on our window. Yeah? Most importantly, our experience is that our window is dirty. We don't experience the window as being clean. In other words, our experience does not correspond to the actual or ultimate nature of reality as it is. And this is why we speak of sentient beings as being ignorant or deluded. Not because they haven't read a lot of books or because they can't do algebra, but because they do not experience reality as it is. So yes, Buddhism is sometimes referred to as a philosophy, and certainly it contains many aspects of philosophy, but it's much more than that. The Buddha wasn't teaching metaphysics, he was teaching a path to liberation. In other words, he was teaching a path so we can see the truth and experience reality as it is. He gave us a path or a way, you could call it a method or even a technology, to clean our window. Because as long as we experience the window as dirty, in other words, as long as we have dualistic perception, self-clinging, and all the emotions and defilements, then we are still path dwellers. We need the relative practices to clean our window. And even though the ultimate window is clean already, we need the boat to cross the river so we can get to the other shore, even though the other shore is already there. So there are a couple of questions on enlightenment, and very briefly, one person asked, what is enlightenment? Is it the same as omniscience? How can we know if we're enlightened or on the right track? And Rinpoche said, yes, the word enlightenment is not so good. I would say for now, when you see the truth, when you see the complete truth, when you're dreaming and when you realize that you're dreaming, already there's a little bit of enlightenment. Another question, what does it mean to say that enlightened beings are not sentient? And Rinpoche said, enlightened beings, it refers to someone who's beyond numbers, directions, space and time, I guess. So hopefully now when we hear Rinpoche talk about enlightenment in this way, the meaning is a little clearer. There were also some practical questions about how to do good in the relative world. I think a lot of us naturally want to connect these aspirations and prayers with the very practical questions of how can we apply it in our own work and life? How can we use this to guide what we might do in the world? So there was one question about Buddhism's view on rights and liberties. So the person asked, I just want to ask about the topic of rights and liberties, and what would you say Buddhism and the Dharma's view on all of that is? Do they align most closely with, say, John Locke or Thomas Jefferson's views on prioritizing individual rights and freedoms and pursuit of happiness above all else, which has shaped much of Western civilization? Or perhaps more with Confucian principles that moral obligation and family hierarchy are more important than an individual's rights and freedoms, which is more common in Eastern civilizations? Or perhaps even something like Marxism, in that collective community or class interests might supersede those of both the individual and the family? Or is there something totally unique and different on the subject that Buddhism would suggest? And here Rinpoche said, as I said earlier, all this only applies from the 26th floor to the ground. Yes, they're all equally a child's game. The person asked, what do you mean, a child's game? Rinpoche said, an illusion, a child's game. There are many metaphors, like a shooting star, a mirage, even some sort of saliva from a small bug that binds itself with this saliva, although I don't know how to translate that, he said. So the person asked, well, what would Buddha say on the issue? And Rinpoche said that you should transcend them all. None of them works. What I'm saying is Churchill is very wrong. He said democracy is second best. It is not. They're all rubbish. So I just want to clarify here that Rinpoche is obviously not trying to be nihilist, right? He's not trying to give us an expression of bring down the government, they don't speak for us. Rather, he's talking about what works in the context of addressing the root cause of suffering. In other words, cleaning the window so that we can realize the ultimate truth and see the nature of reality as it is. And because none of these social or political philosophies offers a path to transcend the relative world, none of them works as a means to realize the ultimate truth. Now, of course, we can still ask questions about what might work best in the relative world, but Buddhism would say that all this is dependent on the different needs of different kinds of sentient beings. As Rinpoche said, we should manifest to teach the Dharma in various ways according to each being. As he once said, if people on Jupiter greet each other and show affection by punching each other on the nose, then if we wish to benefit beings on Jupiter, we need to learn to do this also, whatever we might think about punching people on the nose back here on Earth. And when it comes to the Buddhist aspiration to liberate all sentient beings, any activity in the relative world that is not part of the Bodhisattva's path to enlightenment is no more useful to us than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. So yes, in that sense, they are all rubbish. Okay, there was another question. Rinpoche, my question's about the climate emergency and the way the world is going generally. Some years ago, I heard you say that we should make aspirations, and if we're worried about the climate emergency and all of that, this would really help. But I guess I still have some doubts. From my point of view, maybe there really isn't any future. So what aspiration should I make in that case? And here Rinpoche said, no. If you have taken the Bodhisattva vow, then you should think, okay, this world will end, but so what? I'm not going to give up my Bodhisattva vow. That is the attitude. So again, back to vastness and inconceivability. And purely practically, none of us knows the future. And as the great hockey player Wayne Gretzky supposedly said, you will miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So as bodhisattvas, we never give up. We never lose hope. We keep taking the shots. And even if we don't always score, we will from time to time be able to benefit ourselves and other beings in small ways, and sometimes in not so small ways. And the more we practice, the better we'll get, and the more we'll cultivate the vast view and abilities of the bodhisattvas and the bhumis. And one day we'll be able to make a real difference in making the world a better place. Now this goal may seem vast and profound right now, but as the great Chinese sage Lao Tzu said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So to close, I'd like to share a couple of stories again from the Zen tradition to illustrate vastness. And the first is about the vastness of non-duality that transcends big and small. And this is called Shuzan's short staff. Shuzan held out his short staff and said, "If you call this a short staff, you oppose its reality. If you do not call it a short staff, you ignore the fact. Now what do you wish to call this?" And the second is about the vastness of liberation. It's a beautifully poetic image of the great openness that comes with the realization of non-duality. It's called the first principle. In the 12th month of the lunar calendar, in the year when she was in her last term of study, Chiyono was obliged to go out in the dark night to carry water in an old pail bound with bamboo. The bamboo broke, and the bottom fell out of the pail, and at that moment Chiyono was set free. In commemoration, she wrote a verse. "In this way and that, I tried to save the old pail, since the bamboo strip was weakening and about to break. until at last the bottom fell out. No more water in the pail, no more moon in the water. So with that, let's just take a moment to dedicate the merit. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week.